If esports wants to be in the Olympics, you play for a gold medal, and a silver. Why are we giving them $500,000 US, right? Hi, I'm Ben Feferman.
And I'm Rachel, or Chellalilbella.
And welcome to Esports Unfiltered, where every week we break down the news, stories, and scandals in the esports industry. Now, unfortunately, because of low ratings, we have decided to add a very talented co-host. So Rachel, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am a baby variety streamer, I'm a VR enthusiast, and I'm also a digital marketing strategist. And now I'm the co-host of Esports Unfiltered.
And now she's the co-host of Esports Unfiltered, where, well, we have... Today we're going to talk about the Olympics and esports. Now this is like one of those discussions that is constantly talked about around esports circles. Just like should leagues be franchised, non-franchised, this is one of those very famous discussions. And the reason we are talking about this now is because there's been some pretty significant developments in this discussion, because there was an announcement that esports will be joining breakdancing at the 2022 Asian Games. Let's break it down. What do you think? Is this a good idea, bad idea?
Well, this actually isn't the first time that this has happened. In the 2018 Asian Games, 5 different games were actually given demonstration events, and that included League of Legends, Arena of Valor, Pro Evolution Soccer, StarCraft, Hearthstone, and Clash Royale. So obviously this was a North American Games. Probably none of those would be involved except save for maybe League. But for now, in 2022, they are going to make it official part of the Asian Games.
I have to say, I don't think this is a terrible idea, but I'm just not a huge fan. I think, it reminds me of the story, Clayster and Crimsix, they play for the Dallas Empire in the Call of Duty League. This was an event where, before the league, they played at the X Games. They thought, hey, young people like skateboarding and snowboarding, whatever, let's pair with esports. And they kind of made that point where yeah, it's nice to win a gold medal playing Call of Duty at the X Games, but it felt weird to share it with, a half pipe, or snowboarding, these extreme sports where they're risking their lives, to compete and win. And they just felt like it kind of took a little bit away from it. So that's one of the things that I think might be a detractor from an event like this.
I mean, I think when it comes to comparing it to physical sports and the risk that they're taking, it's just a different way of looking at physical exercise. When we're playing games, video games, we're using our brains, which maybe isn't scientifically categorized as a muscle, but it is still something that we exercise. It's something that we improve constantly. We improve on its cognitive function, and we exercise that through playing strategy games, through playing video games. And there's a whole other category of, mental sports that could also be added to the Olympics other than video games, but these are mental sports. So it doesn't make them any less than or any less physical even than something like skateboarding or, snowboarding. They're still just as physical. It's just a different part of your body that you're utilizing.
Right, but are the optics bad, in the sense that you're watching the Asian Games, you see someone win the marathon, wow, unbelievable. They ran 42 kilometers, 26 miles. Are those fans gonna ridicule the Clash Royale players on their phones? That's what I worry about is, does it create that this weird thing where people say, wow, this is a cool sport, and they're mocking the esports athletes that are competing here?
I think it's more of a question about moving athletics into the future. That we don't idolize, runners and skiers and ice dancers, or we don't idolize these individual athletes like we used to. Who do we idolize now? We idolize big tech. We idolize tech giants. So it's more about it becoming more modern and moving into the future and bringing the technology into the Olympics, just like every other industry has brought technology into themselves. We need to do that with the Olympics as well, whether that be through video games or it be fusing the sports that we already have with technology. It's about becoming a part of this modern world, whereas the Olympics really hasn't to date.
That's a good segue into really talking about, does esports have a place at the Olympics? And I do want to say, just for the record, I think it's a great idea that breakdancing is going to be in the Asian Games, and I kind of would like to see breakdancing make it to the Olympics. I think it would be great sport. So let's talk about Olympics. We've already had a little bit of experience with esports in Pyeongchang in 2018. What do you think Yeah, what do you think's in store for this now fusion between esports and the Olympics?
Well, here's what we know so far. The Intel World Open will take place in the lead up to the now 2021 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. This will feature a $500,000 US prize pool for Rocket League, Street Fighter V, but it does fall short of being an official game at the Olympics. We do know esports will be a medaled sport for Beijing in 2022 Winter Olympics, and for the Olympics in Paris 2024, organizers have said that it will be a medaled sport as well, and they're working with the IOC to make that happen. This is already where there's controversy. Are esports summer sports? Are they winter sports? Can they be both? Does it depend on what you're doing in the game? I don't know.
And which games, right? That's the other interesting part. You know, we know for 2021, which is this year, that they've selected Rocket League and Street Fighter V. And those are very interesting picks. I think they are actually the best picks for that audience. But yeah, which esports will make it in, which won't. There's going to be a ton of controversy even around esports moving into the Olympics. Let's get into some of the arguments for and against. What do you think? What's the biggest reason why esports, in your opinion, has a place at the Olympics?
I mean, like I said, it's a mental sport. Like, there's nothing to disqualify mental sports from being an official sport in general. And I think that's a whole other can of worms that doesn't just relate to video games, but they are a mental sport. And I also think that whether it be through the use of virtual reality or augmented reality, we need to move sports into the future. We need to fuse them with technology somehow, and that will happen regardless. I mean, when we watch science fiction films, nobody's playing regular basketball. It's like freaking flying robot basketball on like hyper skates all the time. So it needs to be moving into the future. Like, it maybe doesn't need to be comical and over the top like that, but we will use technology in these sports, in the base game, within the next 100 years. So it's just a matter of how we're going to do it and which sports and which games we're going to be doing it with.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with mental esports being a mental sport and the role they're going to play. But I kind of want to take a step back and focus more on the Olympic part of the discussion. I think the Olympics are this corporate behemoth that comes into a city or country, demands premier infrastructure, stadiums and things like that, and says like, best of luck with a velodrome and, you know, like all of these like facilities that don't really have a use after the Olympics. You know, the Olympics have lost their luster, I think, and they're stained because of politics and cheating. Like, they're just so political now. Like, you know, we haven't had an Olympics since like Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement. Like, can you imagine how much politics are going to be in the next Olympics? And we've already just seen, you know, with Russia and the doping scandals, like, I'm just like so over it and just think it's really not the prestigious event that it used to be.
I mean, and I think that's where esports can come in. It makes it more accessible. It makes it more virtual. If we have more virtual events, it becomes so super accessible for people who can't necessarily travel to the Olympics. They've never had the opportunity to compete in the Olympics. They've never had the opportunities or the equipment or, you know, just in their lives to actually advance in their chosen sport. So video games, esports is extremely approachable. It allows events to be held virtually. It puts less strains on the hosting countries. So I think that esports, again, solves a lot of problems that the physical Olympics and the strain that it puts on the system of the hosting countries.
Yeah. I was reading that a real driving force behind the desire to put esports into the Olympics is ratings and like a new fan base. But I really question, you know, whether or not there's any crossover. Like, I just don't see Call of Duty being on and then like it's over and everyone's like, oh yeah, let's all go watch ice dancing and ski jumping. Like, I think if you're watching Call of Duty, I don't really think you're like going to watch more other Olympic sports, and vice versa. I just don't see, you know, my mom loves watching the figure skating. I just don't see her like being, oh, now the figure skating's over, it's Overwatch, fight all, you know, I'm gonna check out that. So I think it falls short on getting any new viewers in terms of like some sort of crossover.
I feel like that's a fair point, but I also think that it's already like that in general. I think if you're tuning in for hockey or you're tuning in for basketball, you're probably not tuning in for the other sports like swimming or tennis or ice dancing.
Don't even get me started about swimming.
So it's already something that's lacking. So it's really just about Like they're getting a certain number of viewers for swimming, they're getting a certain number of viewers for basketball. So it's about bringing in that extra category of viewers that otherwise wouldn't have been watching the Olympics at all. So instead they're tuning into one or two or, maybe a handful of events that they are interested in where they wouldn't have been tuning in before at all because physical sports are not up their alley.
Right. And what about the culture though? Like when I look at, there was a big tournament, Ninja had a Fortnite Battles tournament, and a player from TSM, Zexro, won it. And in his acceptance speech, normally when you win a tournament, you're like, thank you to all my fans and my family and my coaches, my supporters, and you congratulate the other athletes. And this guy who wins this big Fortnite tournament, who basically says, all my opponents are dog shit, brain dead, and these players can go suck my, that's kind of like the culture. And yes, he was banned and everything for that, but what is NBC gonna do with the scandal-prone esports versus kind of the very respectful traditional Olympic sports? And I just think there's gonna be a big culture shock.
I mean, I think that's where they can go hand in hand and help each other. I think there is a huge problem with that toxicity and lack of decorum in the esports world. And I think by fusing with these more professional sports and by, having these other regulations in place, it will start to attract more serious players and more serious people and more serious viewers as well. And I think that's an issue that we are seeing now is that esports would like to transition into this very professional realm. And we have these huge tournaments where people are winning huge amounts of money and the player base, the culture is not catching up to it. So perhaps fusing with a more professional world, making it more approachable to other people will help dissipate some of that toxicity that kind of lives there in that community.
You just brought up a really good point that I can't believe I never thought of is, they're competing for a medal, right, at the Olympics. But yet, we just said there's a $500,000 prize pool. If esports wants to be in the Olympics, you play for a gold medal, and a silver. Why are we giving them $500,000 US, right? If you're in the Olympics, you get the medal. And if you're not, you get the prize pool. That's so ridiculous that now there has to be this prize pool for Street Fighter V and Rocket League. I just want to end on one last point about why the Olympics is bull. Just in general, I feel the Olympic format lacks so much integrity. Men's or women's basketball or team-based sports, you play 10 games as a team and you win one medal. But yet sports like swimming, one swimmer can win 6 medals, 10 medals. I don't even know how many swimming events there are. So it's not fair that you have 6 events for swimming, 1 event for basketball. So if you want to have real competitive integrity, 6 basketball events, 3-point contest, 3-point shootout, slam dunk contest, dribble, relay, whatever it is, you got to balance it out or have 1 swimming race. Because otherwise it's so objective that you could win the Olympics with 5 good swimmers and a couple good sprinters and things like that. So that's it about the Olympics. I think this is going to be a topic that's going to dominate amazing talk radio shows like us here at Esports Unfiltered. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in this year's Olympics, assuming it does happen. I do think it will. That's all we have for today. I'm Ben Feferman.
And I'm Rachel, aka Chellalilbella.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. We need you to subscribe and ring that bell. And good night, Tokyo.